Hello students, welcome to Year 11 Biology and module number 4. This is Ecosystem Dynamics. We're going to be looking in video 3 at ecological niches. Our learning intention for this video is that you're able to investigate and determine the relationships between biotic and abiotic factors in an ecosystem, just as we have previously, but this time including the ecological niches occupied by different species. So when you're looking at evaluating your own levels of success, you can use this little scale to do that. Can you define an ecological niche? Can you discuss the factors which help us to define an ecological niche? And can you use the competitive exclusion principle to explain the importance of ecological niches? And perhaps there we might even contrast between fundamental and realized niches. So let's get into it. And what better way to start a biology video than with a little bit of Gary Larson? The important thing is that we're able to define what a niche is. Of course, the cartoon doesn't make much sense if you don't know. And also, when we're trying to study exactly what's going on with particular populations, with particular species, and why they're found in some areas and not others, when we start to look at things like distribution and abundance, which are the two key things that we look at in our study of ecology, then we need to understand how the abiotic and biotic factors affect where a particular organism is living, what sort of habitat it prefers, what sort of environment, what sort of symbiotic relationships with other organisms it has, and what are those key factors that mean it's found in one place and not in another, or more abundant in one place and less abundant in another. So I guess we need to define what an ecological niche is. And an ecological niche refers to all the resources that a species uses in its environment, including both the biotic and the abiotic factors. And of course, this brings us to a very important principle, which we're going to refer to as the competitive exclusion principle. The competitive exclusion principle is that no two species can occupy the same niche. That is, the particular set of conditions of biotic and abiotic factors are such that only one organism, only one type of organism, only one population of organisms can occupy that particular niche. Now, within a particular ecosystem, there may be a very large number of niches that a lot of different types of organisms can occupy. So when we're looking at a particular niche, we're trying to focus our attention specifically on what are the characteristics of that particular set of circumstances that best suits that group of organisms, that species, to be found there and not elsewhere. So if we're going to do that, then we need to look at some of the characteristics of a niche in perhaps just a little more detail. We need to look at the distribution of resources. We actually need to look at, as we mentioned before, the biotic and abiotic factors and how they are going to be useful to a particular species in a particular area. The range of environmental factors that allow that species to survive and reproduce are also important, often dominated by the abiotic factors, but they can also reflect some of the symbiotic relationships that may form between different species. Competing species is important for our competitive exclusion principle that we talked about previously. And so two species that are competing for the same sets of factors, the same niche, are going to end up with one species dominating or excluding the other. It depends on, obviously, the availability of the niche, how many reproduced environments there are within the same ecosystem. But generally speaking, what we're looking for is a particular niche, singular, within an ecosystem, and which species it is that is occupying that particular niche. It's also one of the reasons why we talk a lot about the adaptive radiation of the marsupials in Australia, because they were able to colonize a very large number of very specific factorial sets that they didn't have to compete with, say, similar placental mammals or eutherian mammals who were also interested in a similar sort of set of factors. So, and that's created a nice little isolated radiated population of marsupials in Australia. We also need to be aware of the fact that when we're discussing the characteristics of a niche, we can also look at how the organism itself alters some of those factors. This is particularly true of some of the symbiotic relationships where we see almost evolution hand in hand between two particular species as they become so tied to one another that their reproductive cycles may not be able to occur without their partner organism. So this is where the organism itself can actually alter some of these factors. And we also looked at something like allelopathy, which was an example where, for example, plants can produce certain chemicals in their roots which are going to inhibit the growth of other plants, and therefore it's going to reduce that competition for the same resources, and so therefore also altering the chemical nature of that abiotic factor of that particular niche. Another way of looking at niches is that they are a complex description of the ways in which a species uses its environment. So the important thing here is that we're looking at a dynamic system. We are looking at ecosystem dynamics because these are not static systems. It's not just an empty home that a particular species will go in, live in for a while, and then come out of. These are constantly changing environments where the particular species that's occupying a niche is actually changing the environment as it goes through its life cycles. So we want to be aware of the fact that niches can change over time and they can become quite species specific. So the species that occupies those niches can be very, very tightly tied to the set of biotic and abiotic factors that characterize that particular niche. Something that's probably worth mentioning is the difference between fundamental and realized niches. We have had a look at bird species in the past, and birds are a really good thing to look at in terms of ecological niches, because whilst they might all want to live and nest in trees, they don't all nest in the same types of trees, they don't all eat the same types of food, fruits, nuts, berries. They have particular set of preferred habitats that they like, and that particular set of habitats, that particular set of conditions, both biotic and abiotic, that are required by particular birds are why those birds are tied to the specific niches in which they are found. A good example of this difference between fundamental and realized niches is the koala. Now, the nice thing about the koalas is that it's easy to think, it's easy for Australians, I guess, to think about the requirements for koalas because we know they eat gum leaves. So we think, okay, well, a niche that would be occupied by a koala would be preferentially one which is a eucalypt forest where there's plenty of leaves for the animals to feed on. And there's a little bit of protection from potential predators. Now, if you think about the idealized circumstances for koalas, then you realize there's actually a very large number of fundamental niches for koalas to occupy. In fact, they could pretty well live all the way around the coast of the country, certainly along the east coast of Australia. But they don't. And why don't they? Well, one of the reasons they don't is because the realized niches where we actually find them is limited by some other things, specifically domestic pets and urbanization, which has affected their habitat, I guess, in the most obvious way by clearing, but has also meant that there's a danger in living near areas where perhaps cats and dogs may be able to run around unmonitored and could cause problems for the animals. So that means that where we could find them, where the niche, that set of conditions that we're looking for koalas to survive, may be present, we may give it a tick, but because of the presence of other species, because of the presence of other factors, we don't find them in those areas. So what we're going to be doing in our field study is to have a specific look at some species and where we find them, what set of conditions is going to be ideal to find them in, and how we can link their living habits with the specific niche in which they are found. Thanks for watching.